Hello everybody, welcome and thank you for joining us on this webinar on tackling the causes of food insecurity in developed economies. We are absolutely delighted to have with us today Dr. Megan Blake, who is Senior Lecturer in Geography at the University of Sheffield. Megan's work has been utilised by a number of local authorities in the UK, national and international charitable organisations, local community groups and food industry experts and actors. Her work on food ladders was submitted as an impact case study for the 2021 Research Excellence Framework, and she's an author of more than 40 journal publications, reports, news and media articles, and has a successful record of grant capture. She was the first academic in residence with FareShare UK and is a founder member and academic advisor to the Independent Surplus Food Redistribution Network, XS. In response to COVID-19, she's worked closely with the Food Foundation and the Voluntary and Community Services Emergency Response Food Task and Finish Group. She's also a trustee of Rhubarb Farm in Derbyshire and member of the editorial board for the Mint magazine. Before I pass over to Megan to talk more about her work on food ladders and the concept that she has designed with Sheffield University, then I will just introduce very quickly GoDan and the GoDan initiative for those of you that are not very familiar with our work. So the Global Open Data for Agriculture and Nutrition supports the proactive sharing of open data to deal with the urgent challenges of ensuring world food security. We are a network of over 1,200 partners from governments, public, private sector organisations, international organisations and farmers organisations throughout the world. We build high-level support among governments, policymakers, international organisations and the private sector, and promote collaboration to harness the growth in open data that's being generated by the proliferation of new technologies in order to solve long-standing nutrition and food security challenges. If you'd like to find out a little bit more about what we do, including our work into food poverty, you can find a little bit more at www.godan.info/about GoDan, and you can contact myself and Sashitha Nand, who head our working groups at these email addresses. So I would like to introduce you and pass you over to Megan Blake. If you have any questions, we'll be having a couple of breaks as we go along. So please pop those questions in the question and answer or the chat function, and we will get to those in due course. Megan, whenever you're ready, you can take over.
All right. Fab. Can everybody see that all right? Yep, yeah. Brilliant. Okay, so thank you so much for inviting me to talk today and having me do this seminar with you. And thanks to those of you who have come for taking time out of your busy day. Technology is always a little bit more than I'm able to do, so just beware. There might be a few slide jumps in this. So in wealthy economies, we tend to think of food insecurity as linked solely to affordability. I want to challenge that view in order to make a case for why we need more than financial resolution and charity food responses. If you take nothing else away from this talk today, take away these key messages. Food insecurity in wealthy contexts is more than just affordability. The UN identifies 4 pillars that must be in place and which extend beyond affordability. Food insecurity has effects. These effects settle into people and into the landscape. Once these effects have manifest themselves, they reinforce and contribute to the problem. They become a cause of insecurity in and of themselves. We need to stop thinking of this as a linear cause and effect relationship with inputs and then outputs. It's a cycle and a system. To solve the problem, we must repair these effects as well as what are referred to often as the root causes. So while there are structural issues with the way we provide our financial safety net that we do need to resolve, this by itself won't fix the issue. It's one thing to criticize, but that isn't particularly helpful if we don't offer practical solutions. And this is why I developed the Food Ladders Framework. The framework is derived from my research working with those who provide different forms of food support and by talking to people who engage with those types of support. One thing I realized, and which fundamentally underpins the framework, is that much of this excellent activity that people are doing that supports their communities was not being recognized by the dominant narrative. Data from Fair Share suggests that within their food partnerships of about 11,000 community groups, the larger proportion were not food banks. Moreover, most of the time where a food bank was present, the majority of these same organizations were doing other things with the food as well. They were offering pantries, cafes, social eating, cook and eats, children's breakfasts, and after school lunch clubs, buying cooperatives, allotment sharing, and that's just to name a few of the food related things they did. Alongside, they were also offering other services, support for benefits applications and advocacy when things don't go as expected, negotiating lower energy costs for community members, providing cooking equipment, swapping slippers, providing internet access, and so much more. I wanted to make this visible for people in communities to be able to see how they are contributing to solving the problems in their communities, but also to be a tool for challenging thinking about how we address the issues that produce and reinforce food insecurity. Moreover, fundamentally, these organizations had completely different mindset. They were not seeing deficit. They were seeing a shared problem that they could bring local resources to bear upon to fix the problem. I want this innovation to travel to other places and for new innovations to be fostered. And I just want to say also that while the work focuses on what is being done in the UK, there is no reason the framework could not be used in other places, including places that we might not consider as economically wealthy. Indeed, the framework is informed by international development theory. It draws on asset-based community development, which is itself strong links to SEN's capability approach. So with that in mind, let's get started. The outline of the session, what we're going to do is first I'm going to talk about the 4 dimensions of food insecurity a little bit, focusing a little bit about how they play out in the UK context. And then I want to talk about, then we'll break for a few questions. And then I want to talk a little bit about the outcomes of these effects and the compounding effects, how they produce this system. We'll have another little break, and then I'll talk about the food ladders approach. So that's the plan. So the Food and Agricultural Organization of the UN has 4 dimensions of food insecurity. These include stability, access, affordability, and utilization. Access, affordability, and utilization are kind of the key ones we tend to think about, but this is also about having these things being stable over time. To be food secure, you need to be able to do this all the time. No, I'm not going to go through all these different domains because of time limitations, but I just want to pick on a couple of things to kind of highlight a little bit. So typically in the UK, we focus on affordability. Can I afford the food my family needs to live an active and healthy life? And that's kind of where the conversation tends to stop. But really, what we should also be thinking about is access. And access isn't necessarily about being able to get a bus to some distant place. The question really should be, the question about justice and fairness should be, is there safe, healthy food in the place where I live that meets my needs? I also want to talk a little bit about skills or utilization. Oftentimes in the FAO literature or in the discussion about utilization, it's a focus on food safety and can we, is the food clean? Can we preserve the cold chain and get it to places where people need it? But actually, what we see is that utilization is more than that. Utilization is about skills and bodily ability. Do I have tremors such that it makes it too hard for me to cook? Do I know how to cook? Do I know what it is? Do I have the headspace to be able to cope with all of that? Am I motivated, or am I just kind of lonely and eating by myself? So utilization is something that's more multidimensional. The other thing I would point out is that these domains overlap each other. So affordability and utilization intersect. Can I afford to buy the tools that I need, for example? Do I have the knowledge to diversify my diet, and then can I act on that knowledge? So they're intersecting and overlapping, And then do I have that as all these things all at the same time? Now, there will be some people who will be food insecure because of affordability reasons only. There'll be those who are insecure because of utilization problems only, and some because of access problems only. And then of course, there will be those who fit in these overlapping spaces in the Venn diagram. And I want to illustrate this a little bit with some analysis that we have done, my colleague Adam Whitworth and I have done, with data from the Food Foundation. So this is, there's plenty of narrative analysis or qualitative analysis that talks about how these domains fit, how people fit within these domains or experience food insecurity within these domains. And yet there's a relatively little, or there's a relative lack of quantitative data, particularly in the UK, around how people spread across these domains. And one good reason for that is because there's been a lack of appropriate data. The Food Foundation, over the course of which is a large organization here in the United Kingdom, did a series of surveys on once the pandemic started, waves of surveys to see how food insecurity might manifest itself, but also how it unfolds over time during the period of the lockdowns. Adam and I used the data from September 2020. So this was reflecting back on the month of October, or I'm sorry, month of August. August comes before September. So it's September experiences of UK adults. So note, this does not include children. The 4 variables relating to the reasons for food insecurity were based on question 27, 1 through 4 in the Food Foundation Wave 6 survey. And these are the ones that went into defining the clustering. Now, it's really interesting how the clusters emerge really clearly around these different dimensions. So it maps really nicely onto that diagram that I just presented. The values themselves are a temporality score. So with a range from 4, where no instances of food insecurity is caused by that particular reason, to 1, where every week that person experienced food insecurity as a result of that reason. So 4 reflects perfect food security, and lower scores reflect deeper food insecurity because of a lack of consistency in food access as a result of that particular element. I've shaded the cells green to identify for you the defining characteristics of each of the food insecurity clusters, the reasons why each cluster is being separated out as a distinct. Note that these groups are relatively evenly split across the remaining 13.3% who are food insecure. I want to also point out that this rate is relatively only slightly higher than the rate indicated by the recently released Family Resources Survey, which captures food insecurity rates prior to the pandemic. Importantly, from the rates from Wave 7 of the Food Foundation YouGov survey give us slightly higher rate at about 15%. So just to summarize the groups a little bit, Group 1, the one across the top, are those people who that's the food secure population. Group 2 attributed their food insecurity to their physical ability. This is a proxy for utilization. There weren't questions about, do you have the pans, and do you have longer term issues? So it's kind of an imperfect proxy, but a proxy nonetheless. It sort of indicates or highlights. Group 3 are those who attribute their food insecurity to all of the reasons. Note also, for those who are food insecurity across the 4 reasons, these folk are also likely to experience this insecurity more of the time, as scores are all closer to 1. Groups 4 and 6 are those who attribute their issues to access constraints, and Group 5 attributes their food insecurity to affordability only. What this shows is that people see their food insecurity not just as a result of income problems, and that any solutions we propose will need to include mechanisms that address these other related pillars or related issues. We have unpacked the clusters, and while I'll not present this today, what we can see is that certain groups are more impacted compared to others, with those that are disabled being particularly vulnerable. So looking just at that cluster Group 3, these are the people who experience all forms of food insecurity most severely. The severely disabled are 20 times more likely to be in cluster Group 3 compared to those with no disability. Moderately disabled are nearly 6 times more likely compared to those who are not disabled. Families with 3 or more children are nearly 4 times as likely to be in this group as compared to those who have no children. Interestingly, there wasn't a huge distinction or a huge increase in likelihood if you had 1 or 2 children. One further point I'd like to make is that in the Wave 7 survey, we were also able to distinguish between the severity of food insecurity and the moderate, and in terms of severe, moderate, or worried, which are the severe and moderate are grouped together in this particular analysis. Those who are severely food insecure, using the Wave 7 data, are about 4.1% of the adult population. This involves skipping meals for a whole day. Those who are moderately food insecure cut back by skipping meals or sought food support. This latter group is the larger of the two at about 10.9%. Emergency food parcels meet the immediate needs of the severely food insecure, and then only those who are able to get to the food bank to collect it. The data collected by the food banks concerns their severe experience prior to receiving the food parcel. As a result, we have a real set of gaps in understandings, for example, around those who can't get to the food bank, but also a gap in understanding around the moderately and food insecure. There's also this third group, those who are worried they will have to skip meals or seek support. This is a lot that have sufficient food to eat, but it may not be the most healthy, or the food they need to live a good, healthy life. A further 11% of people fall into this third category. Yet our policy discussions focus on the severely food insecure people and not the remaining folk who fall into the moderate and worried categories. If we think about them all, it means that 1 in 4 people, 1 in every 4 people in the UK has some level of food insecurity. The distinctions are important, however, because different groups need different models of support or different modes of support. So I'll stop there and answer any questions that you might have at this point.
Okay, if I can just remind our participants to please, thank you, Megan, sorry. If I can just remind our participants to put your questions in the question and answer and chat function if you have any questions at this point. I'm wondering, Megan, why do you think that the policy discussions focus more around the severely food insecure and don't really treat the rest?
I think there's a couple of reasons. This other group of people are largely invisible. So the food banks, with the Trussell Trust kind of coming into predominance in, I don't know, 2009, whenever it started sort of really making, coalescing, really began to sort of advertise and highlight the issue. We've always had food security in the UK. We've never counted it. It's, you know, if you don't see it, it doesn't exist. And really most of us are food secure. But, you know, if we don't see it, it doesn't exist. And so you don't have to worry about it. And of course, austerity came in at that time. And it also came in at that time, universal credit was being introduced. And we immediately began to see all sorts of problems with universal credit. So there was kind of a perfect storm of things that happened at that moment that highlighted the affordability issue, and we had a lot of narrative stories of people who are really struggling. So the site, what became visible, was the site of the food bank, and what was going on there. Now, of course, food banks are not all like the Trussell Trust food banks, but one of the things they have done is they do limit access to those who are the most severely food insecure. So the story then emerged from this group, and they don't allow, and you know, there's some reasons for that, but they don't really open their doors to anybody who might be moderately food insecure or who might be worried. It really is food for those who are severely food insecure, and you have to demonstrate that. So it's not going to capture all these other people. So I think, you know, it's appalling that we have 4.4 million, you know, almost 5% of the population is struggling to eat, is skipping whole days worth of food. I mean, that's horrible. We are a wealthy country. And it clearly deserves a policy focus, and it needs some shift to the ways in which we provide a safety net for people. But safety net is not a way of life, and so we really do need to be thinking about these other groups and kind of expanding our discussion a little bit. So that's my thinking around that.
Fantastic, thank you. I know that most of your work is focused on the UK. Alessandro is wondering how the situation across the EU compares to the UK. Is that something that you could perhaps answer for us? Or?
I always get this question. I can't really say fully because I don't do research in Europe, although I do know that there is some data that suggests that the UK is the worst in terms of providing food for its, the UK has the worst or the highest incidences. I suspect that has something to do with neoliberal policy and the way in which the UK has embraced neoliberal policy to a greater extent than, say, some of the other nations. But beyond that, I really couldn't tell you much more. And that's because I don't do a lot of work in that area. There are people who do, and there's some fantastic work that is being done around food insecurity in these other contexts.
Thank you, that's fantastic. In fact, we had University College London joining us for a seminar about 2 or 3 weeks back, and my colleague Sushith Anand is in the background, our chief scientist. So Sushith, if you could find that link and pop it in the chat for Alessandro and everybody else that's interested, that would be fantastic. Fiona is asking what geographical area is covered by your survey, Megan? So is it the whole of the UK or just a few areas?
No, it's the whole of the UK. It's a representative sample of across all 4 nations of the UK. And indeed, we've taken I was going to kind of save this for the end, but we've taken the Wave 7 data and asked for it to be geocoded by local authority. And we've produced some estimates at local authority scale. We'd love to do it at a smaller scale, but can't because of data limitations. But we have produced a map of estimates of food insecurity across those 3 levels of severe, moderate, and food and worried that shows the variation. And it's the kind of the stuff that you might expect. There are parts of London where there's a high food insecurity. There are Wales. In fact, the place with the highest rates are in parts of Wales. And then Hull in England is a site of real disadvantage and hunger. And the Northwest, and then a few places in the Southwest. So Northwest and the Southwest, and a bit of the North, all of the North, really. So we have done sort of a smaller scale geography, but we have all 4 UK nations involved in this data.
Excellent, thank you. Michaela is wondering if you see any differences between the demographics, for example, age, gender, ethnicity, and between rural and urban areas.
So we don't have data to do urban rural divides. I suspect there is some difference. It's interesting that some of the real rural local authorities come up as being more food insecure, and that might be just a population thing. And it might be linked also to the way we did the modeling, which includes indices of multiple deprivation. And that there's an issue there around, I mean, it could get really technical here, but there's an issue there around how IMD maps onto places and the size of those places. So it may be that there are smaller pockets of food insecurity in rural places that's not being captured so much. In terms of demographics, as I kind of mentioned, people who are severely disabled or disabled are the group that have been most profoundly affected. We do see women are about 50% more likely to be food insecure compared to men. BAME groups are 1.5 times as likely to be food insecure compared to non-BAME groups. And we also, from our data, see that younger people are the most severe, the 18 to 25-year-olds are the most food insecure compared to the very oldest people, which had the lowest rates, lowest proportion of food insecurity. So, which I thought was quite interesting. Yeah, I'll just stop there. But yeah, there are some demographic differences in terms of vulnerability. Adam and I are writing a paper on this right now, and we're hoping to publish those results soon.
That's fantastic. And if I could just ask Megan if you could share that with the working group once it is published, and then that way people can get hold of it, that would be wonderful. Deepak is mentioning that people in developing countries or believe that a country like the UK is mostly food secure. And yes, Deepak, we do sort of hear that a lot, and it can becomes a bit of a surprise that there are these pockets of food insecurity. Deepak would like to know whether there is a potential for applying your food ladder concept to developing countries.
So absolutely there is an application, and when I get to the food ladders approach, hopefully you'll see it's a framework, and it's a framework that can be tailored locally. Certainly the pillars of food insecurity, those were developed by the UN, and they were targeting or focusing specifically on countries that are less economically well off. We tend to think of the United Kingdom as being food secure because as a nation we are, depending on how you calculate that, but typically there's plenty of food in the UK. As a country, there's plenty of food. It's just that that food is not getting to everybody. So there's levels of food insecurity, there's national food insecurity, or security, and then there's also household food insecurity. And what I'm really talking about now is household food insecurity. And when we look inside that, inside the nation, we see that the UK is very widely divided in terms of its food security, with a quarter of people being in some level of food insecure. If we include the worried lot, if you go to a country that's less economically well off, you will find a higher rate, which doesn't, which is, there are more people in those places that are food insecure. But having said that, we're a rich country, and we should be able to solve this problem. We're a rich country. We're, what, 7th wealthiest country in the world. So we should really be able to solve this problem.
Absolutely. And food insecurity anywhere it occurs is a real worry, and something that we should all take seriously.
Yeah, it's not a competition.
Pravin is saying, has food insecurity of migrants been taken into account in your study?
So it's a representative sample, so there will be migrants, but they won't be separated out by specific migrant groups because the sample is not large enough. Okay,
fabulous. Thank you. If you could carry on, Megan, with your second presentation, then that would be fantastic.
Sure. All right, so what I want to do now is so those were I talked about the 4 pillars. I want to now talk about the effects of food insecurity. It has effects. It settles, as I mentioned, it settles into people's bodies. It settles into their soul, and it settles into the landscape. Looking at individual level effects, we can see hunger on our food deprivation, and this is the discomfort or pain caused by insufficient energy consumption. So food security isn't this thing, it's also viscerally felt. We also see it in terms of people's food practices. So people narrow their diets. They shrink what counts as food. And not only do narrow diets contribute to malnutrition, which is defined as deficiencies, excesses, or imbalances in nutritional consumption that lead to dietary poor health, we can see that these are more prevalent in some groups. So 10% of those who are malnourished or at risk of being malnourished are over 65 years old. There is an estimated cost of $20 billion per year that we spend trying to address this need once somebody becomes malnourished. Malnourishment is more prevalent in those with long-term health conditions, such as dysphagia, which is a problem swallowing, those who are socially isolated, who have limited mobility or on low income, and those who are recovering from serious injury, cystic fibrosis, or who have tremors. And this really speaks to that kind of being able to utilize food point that I was making. Eating according to the Eat Well Guide will address some of this issue, but it also has links, of course, to affordability and access. So it's unaffordable for those who live in the UK who earn less than £15,860 a year, and 1/5 of the UK population of UK households falls into this category. There are 3.7 million children who live in these households. It's also difficult for those who live in a food desert. These are the places that don't have the food that people need. I'd also add that diet diversity is a key change that must happen if we're going to address climate change, something that people are worried about, including those who are food insecure. But if you are food insecure, it becomes difficult to participate in this societal activity because it is literally and figuratively out of reach. Furthermore, some charity support and certainly government benefits demand that people prove that they are eligible for that support by their lack. And then this lack is cast as personal failure, which includes a failure to budget and provide for one's family. According to Danny Miller, thrift is a key British value. I have met so many people who are food insecure who practice amazing thrift acrobatics, keeping track of the cost of various products across a range of stores so they know when and where the bargains are to be had, managing household budgets that do not stretch far enough. Walking miles because they know the cost of the transport will mean that there will be less for food. Not only does this combination of being made to feel a failure and the effort to manage create a heavy mental load on people, it induces stress and engenders a loss of self-confidence. It also denies recognition of how these folk are enacting this more widely held British social value. Finally, there's a quote in my film, and there's a link to the film at the end, by Sam, who runs this fantastic organization in Doncaster in her community. She said, if people haven't got money to eat, they've not got money to socialize. When support relationships cast one person as needy and the other as the savior, the ability to be reciprocal is undermined. Socializing, being able to reciprocate and participate in shared social values are a key part of being human. They are as fundamental to human existence as breathing and avoiding hunger. So just to illustrate this a little bit, let me point you to Liam. Liam is a participant in a study that Nicole Kinnard and I are currently writing up about the experiences of food insecurity during the pandemic of people who accessed a food support scheme in Sheffield. This interview was conducted in August. Before the pandemic, Liam was not financially insecure and never used food support. The stress of the pandemic created additional tensions in Liam's relationship, which ultimately led to troubles in managing his alcohol addiction. Because of this, he was kicked out of his house during lockdown by his partner of 6 years, causing him to live homeless in his car for some time before being taken in by his sister and then moving to a shelter. He describes how lockdown, in this quote, how lockdown influenced the deterioration of his relationship and his ongoing impacts on his mental and physical health. So Liam's food insecurity problems are linked to his alcohol addiction and the stress the pandemic imposed on his family life. To address his issues, Liam needs more than just financial support. He needs additional services to help repair the mental and emotional effects of this experience. He needs housing. He also needs support getting back into employment. In the future, when he is ready, he will also need support getting over his addiction, and he needs help to get to that point. So we can see there's a real complexity, and these effects are really heartbreaking, actually. We can also think about food insecurity, in addition to manifesting itself in people's bodies and in their lives, also sediments into the landscape. And it does this through the loss of foodways in that place. So people forget what certain foods are, they don't know how to cook them and so forth. There are loss of support networks. So as people become more isolated, their social networks wither and die. This in turn reduces community resilience because you have nowhere to turn. And then it also results in degraded food landscapes. or foodscapes, that because there is no demand, because diets have become narrow, because the shops are there to make a profit, not provide food to people, but to really make a profit, that disconnect between supply and demand means that the food that you need to live a healthy life disappears from that landscape. And Diane provides another participant in our study, provides a really interesting quote that sort of illustrates that. Diane is a survivor of domestic abuse. She moved into a women's shelter just before lockdown in March, and she was unable to leave because she had also recently had a medical procedure that required her to shield. She described that the only way for her to obtain food was to send NHS volunteers to the local shops, which increased her food costs considerably compared to where she shopped before. There was no similar alternative in the area where she was living. Diane's story illustrates the isolation she was experiencing that resulted in having to spend more on food because she did not have friends or family who would be able to pick things up for her at the place where she normally shopped, and the volunteers would only go to the local shops in her area. To address food insecurity, we must also repair the foodscapes in which people live. We should not expect people to have to travel long distances to be able to access food. So, sorry, page down, let me get there. There we go. So what I want to do in this last slide before I open up for questions again is I want to illustrate how effects of food insecurity create a downward spiral for both people and places that exacerbates the problem. And I'm not going to go through all of this. I just kind of wanted to highlight and let you read for yourself, just kind of picking up on this idea of lack of social networks. You know, the reliance on commercial services to access food increased cost for Diane, which then meant that she wasn't able to eat as healthy as she had previously, and ultimately her budget didn't stretch. It also reduces, the lack of social networks reduces the desire to cook and eat healthy meals, leading to malnutrition, and we do see this a lot in older people. And it also links to loneliness. And then, of course, reduced social cohesion also goes hand in hand with fear of crime and vulnerability to crime, but also reduced political participation. So the kind of effects of food insecurity not only feed back to and help recreate the consequences, the context of food insecurity, but it also spirals outward to create and contribute to a whole range of other problems. So if we're going to address food insecurity, we need to consider all its causes and repair its effects as they manifest at the community scale. And food itself is a really fantastic mechanism. It's a fantastic object for helping to do that. So I'll stop now before I turn on to the food ladders component of this talk.
Thank you very much, Megan. Does anybody have any questions at this point? I can't see any new questions in the chat at the moment.
Okie dokie.
So if you'd like to carry on to explain the food ladders concept, and there'll probably be a few questions at the end of that one. Thank you very much.
Fine, yeah, absolutely. So you know, food ladders really is a framework to kind of repair those facts. It tries to take a much more holistic view, and it tries to build on the like I mentioned, the development literature and so forth. So what I'm going to do in the next few slides is just provide an overview. There is an elaboration of this and several videos of me talking about it on my personal website, which is geofoodie.org. And you're more than welcome to go and download, look, play around with the various bits. I've got kind of a mapping exercise that I would welcome feedback on. So I'll just give you this overview in the next little bit. So this framework is really, this is the broad sort of idea about the framework. So it's an approach for creating household and community resilience. And as I said before, it was really an attempt to highlight, was to build off and highlight and bring together and synthesize good work that is already going on, but which is largely under recognized. And it's meant to do it to make it visible so that we can begin to see new pathways, new landscapes, new ways of doing and addressing food insecurity, or to talk about it in a more positive way of creating positive creating food security in the places where we live. Now, I acknowledge that we also have national scale repair work to do, absolutely, and there is a role for national government even in supporting local scale activities. So, for example, we need to adjust the issues around budget cuts to local authorities. There are absolutely national level things that we can do. So this is not about giving national government a free pass to carry on as usual, but it's to provide guidance and support and help people to see what they also can do in their local area as they also lobby their local representatives. All right, so food ladders is focused on 3 intersecting domains. And I pull these out to try to make it more simple for people. And these are food, social, and economic. And I want to also say it could include other domains. So for example, the environmental domain or political participation. I've really focused on these 3 domains because that is where my work sits centrally. And I invite people doing research in other areas to consider how they might use the framework to build other ladders. For example, is there something around food production that we could think about? Is there a ladder for transition with food production? So the other thing I want to point, this takes a practice approach, not an organizational or identity-based approach. So it thinks, it's practices. So it's focusing on activities, not organizations. So one organization may engage with multiple activities, and I've kind of given some examples of those already. So food, the stuff that falls within the food domain are activities that are specifically related to the food itself and anything to do with nutrient, calorie, or food-specific skills and enterprise. The social is activity that's focused on or results in social interactions. So how do we create, social interactions? How do we incorporate or enable people to be involved in some of those more widely held social norms? How do we enable them to be reciprocal? How do we enable them to self-organize? How do we support them to be engaged politically and so forth? And then of course, there's the economic activity that's focused on or results in addressing an economic insufficiency or creating new economic outcomes. So that's broadly the sort of domain. So there's a ladder for each one of those domains. So going to the next step, then we have rungs on it because a ladder has rungs, right? So there's a ladder for each domain, and then there's rungs on each ladder. And I've drawn really from the resilience theory to structure this ladder, it really drops sort of focus that seeks to transition to an asset-based community development approach, while recognizing also that we cannot expect people to have the skills, knowledge, and mindset to shift radically from needing support or thinking they need to fill a gap for others to transforming the places where they live. Capacity needs to be built, people need to develop skills to adapt to a whole new way of living. So the first rung is about catching people, and that's where the kind of food banks sit. But it's any activity that just catches and does to someone, it fills a need for them. The second rung is really about capacity building, and this is about building or doing with people. How do we work with them to develop the capacities and the ideas and the understanding and the skills that they need to be able to move beyond where they currently are. Currently in our system, we have the food bank at one end and we have the supermarket on the other, and the gap between the two is really wide, and we need a lot more, and we need to recognize that, which is going on, which is actually filling and dealing with this space within the gap. And then finally, rung 3 is self-organizing for community change. And this is transformation from a recipient or content user to a content provider. This is someone who works with their communities and identifies a need and fills it. And there's a really fantastic work in the UK going on around this in adult social care. So we can look to adult social care for some existing models that I absolutely believe could be applied to food. So just some points here. This is ladders, not levels. It's not an escalator. So it's ladders, not levels. We need to be moving people up and across, not just just leaving them in that space. And oftentimes one of the biggest barriers I think I see toward producing food ladders in places is actually this notion that you know, all the food banks in a locality know each other, and all the commercial people know each other, but between the two, they're not referring, they're not supporting, they're not intersecting. We really need more mobility there. Also, people, you know, people experience food insecurity in really different temporal ways. And to assume that they're just going to kind of go into the chute and up the escalator and pop out the other end is not realistic. What we need to do is recognize that people are going to go up and down. And that we need to have things in place to support them as they do go up and down. And it's more than about how food is accessed. We also need to recognize that individuals and projects will be on different rungs on different ladders. So there might be people, there might be projects that are absolutely, or people that are absolutely filling, you know, doing a catching activity in one area, but are fine, they have a job. So they need to go to the food bank, but they have skills and whatever, but they've just in a moment in their life where they need to go to the food bank to get some support. And they may not need all that kind of connective other sort of stuff that some of the ladders will provide. So it really, you know, we need to recognize that people are in different places on the different ladders. We also need to understand or think about this in terms of capacity building is about enhancing capacity where it is needed for each person in the community more widely, not about going in and saying, right, this is what you need to learn. And it starts from a position that everybody, so Food Ladder starts from a position that everybody has assets. And the number of times I've heard people say, those people in that place have no skills and no understanding and no assets, and we just have to go in and help them. And actually, when you go into those places, when I did a bunch of work in a community in Doncaster where that is how they were cast. But you go into that place and you discover actually there are lots of really amazing assets in that place. And it's such an interesting, thriving place doing so many good things. I also want to say, you know, oftentimes I get people coming to me saying, right, great, we want to implement the food ladders approach. How do I do it? And, you know, that's a really good question. I don't know the full answer to that. You know, there's some magic dust that happens, and it's about the community itself. And it's about finding that magic dust within the communities that you're working with and where people live. But if you start from the asset approach, you're more likely to find the magic dust. So the ladders framework is really about thinking and helping people to organize what's in a place, but also organize their thoughts and their focus, and to use it as a mechanism for bringing people together to enable the social functioning and participation that they want and need. So it's, you know, it's not easy. It's not a kind of, oh, take this and apply it here. It requires a lot of work and effort and intervention and engagement, but where I have seen it work and where it is working, the outcomes are amazing and really transformative for people. All right, so I'm not sure where I'm in with time here. I'll be really quick. I've got some, just to kind of pull that apart a little bit, just focusing on the food domain and the 3 levels, how it kind of sits across. We can think of the catching food activity as emergency food support. People don't have any food, we give them food. Soup kitchens are another example of that. Capacity building, however, are activities that enhance food literacy. So it teaches people or exposes them to foods that they wouldn't normally experience as foods. Exposes them to nutrition and health information. Cooking lessons, example pantries are really a great example of exposing people, because they often draw on surplus food. They're really fantastic for exposing people to foods that they wouldn't normally eat. And the number of people who are very risk adverse because it's expensive and it's dangerous for them to waste their resources on trying something new through this sort of surplus food initiatives really do get to try something new. And I think Marcia Smith might have talked about that a little bit last week. And then transformation is really the stuff that's about doing with, you know, people are doing it for themselves. They're sort of organizing, they're setting up market gardens. They're developing cooperative buying clubs. They're creating community meals where they're eating with each other. They're going, you know, they're they're doing things together outside of the community center where the stuff has been happening that's been capacity building. So that's sort of transformation. I'm not going to go, and there, you can do the same exercise for social and economic, and I'm not going to go through that, other than just to say, I think there's some real role for creating markets and local procurement, and we can see some of that activity going on that really fit in this transformational and capacity building domain in the economics. So think widely more than just about jobs. It's important to, just to summarize, and moving people up the ladders and across the ladders really needs to happen for everyone in that place. I would say that it's all right if organizations are only intersecting within a single domain, provided places can be developed where those other activities are also present within that foodscape, meeting the social needs, meeting those kind of capacity building needs, and that people are then referring across to others. We need to encourage that all organizations are supporting people to move up the ladders and across all domains for change to happen. So I'll stop there. Just, I have a few references to my work, which you can see there, and I can share them. I can share the slides with Godan. And then just, this is a preview of the map that I mentioned, and I will let you know when it's available. It's a clickable map, and there are 3 levels on it, which can be turned on and off how you like to, and it's zoomable. So it's pretty groovy, and it will be coming soon. So thank you very much. I hope that's been informative, and I'm happy to take any questions.
That was absolutely fantastic. Thank you, Megan, for sharing your work with us. There are a few questions that have come through already, but if anybody does have any more questions, then please just add them to the chat and the question and answer function. And we do have a couple of minutes to ask a few questions. So Alessandra is asking, is talking about identity of food, by which I think that she's meaning food culture. So would it be helpful to develop more of a food culture in the UK and maybe focus on that rather than just the social aspect in terms of helping people to eat better and to understand what better eating might look like?
Sorry, I'm struggling with that question a little bit. Are you, certainly there's nothing, there's nothing that precludes. I'm guessing you're talking about intercultural mixing. Is that right? And certainly some of these groups absolutely do that. So they'll have a shared meal or a cooking activity. Community Shop does this, where they have a community potluck where everybody brings a dish and shares a dish from their, a dish from their place. I think there are food cultures in the United Kingdom, and I don't think it's necessary that we have one food culture. I'm not sure I'm answering your question because I'm not sure I understand the question exactly.
So Alessandra's just followed up with food insecurity also comes with perhaps not knowing what to eat or which products to choose.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's part of that knowledge. That's part, if we go back, let's go way back up. If I go right back up, sorry. Back up to all the way back here. If we look at the utilization dimension, that is absolutely about knowledge and know-how, knowing what it is and knowing how to use it. And that, of course, intersects with affordability. So if you can't afford food, you're going to pick things that are safe, that you know your family will eat. You might do it relationally, so it might be a case of foregoing the micro burgers and opting for the 5 frozen pizzas, because actually the 5 frozen pizzas will last the whole week. You can get it home easily because they're self-contained. It's going to taste the same at the end of the week as it does at the beginning of the week because you just pop them in the freezer. Everybody will eat it. There won't be any arguments. Everybody likes pizza, right? So people will choose those things over this new low-cost food item that you don't know what it is, because people might not like it and you're not really sure it's going to fill you up. And it might be nice, but you don't know. And you don't know because, you've not had it before. And that's really quite risky. When you're on a very tight budget, if you risk that, you're losing, you're wasting money. So, what happens is that diets shrink and people's knowledges disappear about how to cook cauliflower, for example, or what a parsnip is. It's weird food. Grapes are weird food in the United Kingdom for some communities because it's expensive. A punnet of grapes is £2.50, and you can get a frozen pizza for £1. So there's an incredible rationality there, and yes, there is a skills loss that happens. So I would agree, absolutely. Food insecurity is certainly about that.
Thank you very much. Deepak is asking, or Dheeraj, sorry, excuse me, is area dependent malnutrition an issue in developing nations? So kind of regional.
I'm sure there is. I don't do work particularly in these areas, although I've supervised PhD students who've done some of this. And yeah, like anywhere, there will be malnutrition, and it will impact certain groups more than others. You can bet if it's happening in a wealthy country, it's also going to be happening in a less well-off country. There's a whole literature on nutrition and food insecurity in countries that are less economically well off. Oftentimes, I think it's important when we talk about countries that are less economically well off. I think it's also really important to remember that in these places, these like the UK are divided economies or divided societies. I lived in Hong Kong for a while, and we tend to think of Hong Kong as being this incredibly wealthy place. But actually quite a small proportion of the population is incredibly wealthy. And there is a huge number of people who are financially struggling and live in the most abhorrent conditions. And then you can go to other countries that we might cast as being entirely struggling or a low income country, and you will still find pockets of extreme wealth in those places. So when we think about it as a structure of disadvantage, that the pyramid might be wider or lower, different shape, but it's every country has a pyramid, I guess is what I would say. So certainly there will be these issues.
Thank you very much. Wilberforce is asking, I know that you kind of touched on developing economies, but would it be possible to develop the food ladder strategy, for example, for children in developing economies, for example, Africa?
Absolutely. I don't see why not. It's like I said at the very beginning, the research draws on resilience literature, which international development theory draws on. It also absolutely draws on the food insecurity literature, household food insecurity, which is something that is framed more widely and kind of better within the international development literature. And so actually with this, what I'm doing is I'm drawing from learning from international development to a developed context. I'm bringing that work into a developed context, not trying to farm it out. Look at this great stuff we do, and you should do it too. Actually, what I'm doing is sort of bringing in some lessons that have been developed and seeing how they work out or how they play out in the UK context. Do these theories, do these ideas work out here, and what do they look like? How might they look the same? How might they look different? And then in what ways can we mobilize them to produce food ladders? So I absolutely think that drawing on the wide principles and thinking carefully about how to move people up and across, that it would work with children in a low-income context.
Thank you very much. Joshua is asking, whether you think local authorities or communities might face any barriers or challenges while attempting to implement food ladders?
Yes. So I do a lot of work with various local authorities across the UK and communities. And one of the big challenges is around shifting people's understanding and their orientation. The number of times I've been in a place and I've, said, right, we need to do this. We need to be thinking about capacity building. We need to acknowledge these middle group people. We need to figure out different ways of doing it. We need to, the problem is more than financial. And everybody going, yeah, we get you, we're with you. And then the conversation happens and they're back to, only if we had another food bank. And, food banks have a role in the purpose, but it's not the whole story. And it's not the whole issue. And actually there's an abundance. Sheffield has 17 food banks. What we need is more of that sort of middle level stuff, or we need them to connect and partner with other activity that's going on within the local authority. So the thinking is one of the biggest barriers. I think also there's a barrier around financing. Food security is not particularly a statutory requirement. Well, it is kind of, but it's not, building food resilience is not a statutory requirement of local authorities. Health is, and improving the economy are. And, if you can get a local authority to think across those things creatively, you can bring the two together. But food specifically is not. And so we end up with very finite resources being directed toward other things, like trying to address obesity crises without actually trying to it must be that people don't know, right? So we need to explain to them that this particular food item is not a particularly good choice, without kind of addressing those other problems that, the affordability, the access, the rest of it. So again, that's kind of linked to resources, but also linked to the thinking, and local authorities' horizons are very short, partly because the elections come around very quickly and you get a whole new set of priorities with a whole new set of people coming into power. And so what was a priority for one group is deprioritized for another. And so you have to do things in order to keep momentum and keep it going. You have to do projects that actually have quick wins and clear measurable outputs. And measuring these things, some of these things are hard. Building trust in communities and getting people to a point where they feel where they're able and capable of self-organizing and they feel like they have permission to do so, takes time and longer than sometimes the political time horizon. So those are some of the elements. Those are some of the barriers and the difficulties that we face. There are probably others, but those are certainly something.
Thank you, Megan. I'll just squeeze one question in. I have to apologise to everybody who's asked such fantastic questions, but we can't get round to all of them today. Michaela is asking our final question. Do you think, or how much do you think the growth in large supermarket chains in the UK has fed into this phenomenon of greater food insecurity and weaker resilience?
That's an interesting question. That's an interesting question. And a complex one. And I've looked at this to some extent in Hong Kong, because it's easier to trace the trace that emergence of large supermarket chains. Certainly, and what happened in Hong Kong was that it killed off the medium size, the small to medium sized shops. There are still market stalls in Hong Kong and public markets, which are vibrant and exist, although the government is doing its best to kill those off as well. But the markets serve a local need for people around a whole host of things like sociality, and they can buy smaller amounts of food than what you can buy in the prepackaged way in the supermarket. And in planning, in Hong Kong's planning, those markets, for any new building, there has to be an allocated food access. And we don't have that in British planning. There isn't, if you're going to build a housing estate, you don't have to include food access as part of that, and healthy food access. And in Hong Kong's planning, it actually specifies the amount of market space that there should be, or at least it did up until about 2013-14. So I do think there has been a role that supermarkets have played. I think also, though, we must remember that, like I said, we've always had food insecurity. Supermarkets have introduced us to things that we didn't have before, and they've also helped us with regard to resolving problems such as rickets, which was, really dominant in this country, and living with rickets is not a very nice way to live. So they've smoothed out the food insecurity in some way, because it smoothed out the problem of seasonality, but they have introduced the problem, or not introduced fully, but contributed to the problem of affordability and waste. I think also, or would add also, that like I said, we've always had food insecurity. What we've had more of, though, since austerity was introduced, is a greater degree of food insecurity. And there is absolutely no doubt that the 6-week wait associated with universal credit and the 3-child limit, or 2-child limit, which is evidenced by the data that I presented, and the cutbacks to our support for adult social care and our disability payments, and the ways in which people are being thrown off disability support, have absolutely had an impact. So there is a policy impact which has caused a problem. And in the causing of that problem, it's exacerbated and created effects which are then reinforced and continuing to cause the problem. So we can't roll back time. We have to move forward, and we now have to fix the additional problems that have been created by that initial change.
Thank you, Megan, for those fascinating insights, and thank you so much for coming to talk to us today. I'd just like to say thank you also to our participants for joining us today. We'll be packaging up the links and the references that Megan's shared with us and sending them out to everybody who's participated and signed up for the webinar today, along with an invite to the Go Down Food Poverty Working Group. And I can also see that Sushith has left a link in the chat function as well to the Capacity Development Working Group. So we'll point you towards that as well if you are interested. However, the Food Poverty Working Group deals directly with the issues that we've been talking about today. So if you get involved in that and sign up to the mailing list, then it means we can share with you more updates on Megan's work and on other work that's going on around the country. Thank you so much, Megan, for joining us, and we hope that we can catch up soon.
Thank you so much for coming and for joining today, everybody, and for listening. And again, I've included my email, contact details, and my Twitter handle and the rest of it. So do get in touch if you want to know more. I'm absolutely, keen to share the work.
Fabulous. Have a good day. Goodbye.
You too.